The rain hammered the glass walls of the penthouse on the 40th floor of the Moretti Tower in Manhattan, as if the sky itself were warning of the storm about to break inside. Vincent Moretti slammed his phone onto the marble table, the sound sharp enough to make 2 bodyguards flinch. His jaw locked, his knuckles white, his breath short. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, New York glittered indifferent, but inside the conference room, $80 million were bleeding out by the second. Find me a Russian translator. Right now. I don't care if you have to drag one off the street. His voice was low, the kind of low that had ended careers, marriages, and lives. The 2 men in black suits scattered toward the hallway like smoke. Vincent loosened the silk knot at his throat, then tightened it again. 15 minutes. That was all that stood between him and the biggest deal of his career, or the most catastrophic collapse of the Moretti Empire in 3 decades. Anton was supposed to be here. Anton was always here. For 7 years, the quiet Belarusian had sat 2 chairs to Vincent's left, translating Russian whispers into English thunder. Anton knew every dialect, every tick, every idiom the Bratva used when they thought no one was listening. And now, 90 minutes before the most dangerous negotiation of the year, Anton's phone rang into silence. His apartment in Queens was empty. His car was still in the garage. His wife said he had kissed their daughter goodbye and walked out the door at 7 that morning, and nobody had seen him since. Vincent didn't know it yet, but Anton was already at the bottom of the Hudson River, a single hole behind his left ear. Marcus Donovan stepped into the room, adjusting his cufflinks with a calm that was almost too perfect. Vince, we've called every interpreter in the city. Short notice. Nobody credible. You want me to stall them? You don't stall the Bratva, Vincent said, not looking up. You stall the Bratva, and you become a lesson. Old Tommy entered behind Marcus, leaning on his cane, the white of his hair gleaming. 65 years old and still the sharpest consigliere in 5 boroughs. He read Vincent's face the way a priest reads a dying man's confession. Vincent, 12 minutes. What do you want to do? Vincent pressed 2 fingers against his temple. He thought of his father, buried in a Brooklyn cemetery under a name not even his own. He thought of the 15 years he had spent climbing from a back alley enforcer in Little Italy to the man seated at this table. He thought of the $80 million. He thought of the 3 Russians already on the elevator, rising toward him like a slow bullet. He thought, for half a second, about running. Then he straightened his tie. Get everyone seated. Smile. I'll figure something out. What Vincent Moretti did not know, as he stood alone at the head of that gleaming black table, was that the next 10 minutes would not only save his life, they would unravel every secret he had buried for 6 years, expose the traitor sitting closest to his heart, and place the fate of the entire Moretti Empire into the hands of a 7-year-old girl with a torn coat and a stuffed bear. The intercom buzzed. The receptionist's voice trembled through the speaker. Mr. Moretti, the Russians are on their way up. Vincent exhaled, long and slow, and then the conference room door began to open. The door did not open the way Vincent expected. It did not swing wide to reveal Dmitry Volkov and his pressed suits and his cold Russian smile. Instead, it creaked inward from the service corridor on the opposite wall, the one used by the cleaning staff, and what stepped through made every man in the room forget, for a moment, that $80 million were about to walk through the main entrance. A little girl, no taller than the back of Vincent's leather chair, tangled blonde hair half braided by fingers that had clearly never been taught how, a wool coat 2 sizes too large, the sleeves rolled 4 times and still swallowing her wrists, sneakers with 1 lace missing and the rubber peeling from the toe, pressed against her chest, a small stuffed bear with a cream-colored ribbon around its neck. Behind her, in the doorway, stood Rosa Martinelli, the old baker from the shop 2 blocks south, her flour-dusted hands already lifted in an apology she hadn't yet spoken. Mr. Moretti, forgive me. I know I shouldn't, but she said she could help. She said she heard you in the hallway. Please, just listen to her for 1 second. Tony, the hulking bodyguard by the far wall, was already moving. His hand closed around the girl's thin shoulder the way a man closes a fist around a fly. Out, now. Wait. Vincent's voice was quiet, but it cut the room in half. Tony froze. The little girl did not cry. She did not flinch. She looked up at Vincent Moretti, the most feared man in the 5 boroughs, and in a voice that barely rose above the hum of the ventilation, she spoke. Sir, I speak Russian. I heard you outside. I can help. For a half-breath, nobody moved. Then Marcus Donovan laughed, and the laugh was a shade too loud, a shade too fast. A few of the capos joined him, uncertain, glancing at Vincent for permission. Even old Tommy allowed himself a thin, tired chuckle at the absurdity. Vincent did not laugh. He stepped forward instead, slow, measuring, until he stood directly in front of the child. He lowered himself into a crouch so that his polished Italian shoes met her ruined sneakers, and his storm-gray eyes met her pale blue ones at the same height. "How old are you, kid?" "7, sir." The room erupted. Even the quiet men were grinning now. Someone coughed the word circus into his sleeve. Marcus Donovan smiled too, but Vincent, who had spent 15 years reading the faces of liars, noticed something else beneath that smile. A flicker, a tightening at the corner of the eye, a small, wrong thing. He filed it away. Then Vincent turned back to the girl and spoke, not in English, but in Russian. He chose a sentence deliberately, a long and tangled one, full of Moscow slang and a proverb his grandfather had taught him decades ago, a phrase no textbook would touch. A wolf changes his fur, but never his habits, and the man who forgets this lesson feeds the forest before the first snow. The laughter in the room died in pieces. The little girl did not blink. She tilted her head the way a bird tilts toward a familiar song, and then, in English as clean as spring water, she answered, "You said a wolf can change his coat, but never his nature, and any man who forgets that ends up feeding the woods before winter. It's a proverb. My mother used to say it when she didn't trust somebody. Silence. Real silence. The kind that presses against the windows." Vincent Moretti had not been surprised by anything, or anyone, in 9 years. He felt it now like a stranger knocking on a door he thought he had sealed shut. His pupils contracted. His breath slowed. His whole world narrowed to the small, tired face in front of him. Behind him, Marcus Donovan had gone very, very still. Vincent's eyes flicked to the gold watch on his wrist. 3 minutes. 3 minutes was not enough time to run a background check, find a parent, or even pour a glass of water. 3 minutes was enough time to make a decision that might bury him. Vincent made it. He straightened to his full height and snapped his fingers once. A capo named Luca rushed forward with a cushion from the sofa in the lounge. Vincent pointed to the seat at his immediate left, the seat Anton should have been sitting in. "Put her there. Raise the chair." Then he looked at the girl, and his voice dropped into the velvet register he used when he wanted something to be remembered the rest of a man's life. "Listen to me carefully, kid. You're going to sit in that chair. You're going to translate every word they say into English, and every word I say into Russian. If you get it right, you walk out of here with more money than you've ever seen. If you get it wrong, on purpose or by accident, we both die in this room. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" The girl nodded once, firmly, the way a soldier nods. Vincent turned to take his own seat at the head of the table. He had taken exactly one step when he felt it, the lightest tug on the fabric of his suit jacket, barely more than a moth brushing the cuff. He glanced down. Her small fingers had caught the edge of his sleeve. "Sir." The word stopped his heart mid-beat. She had not said, "Sir." She had said it in Italian, in the soft Roman cadence his own grandmother used to speak when she wanted him to pay attention. And the word she chose next, she breathed so quietly that only he could hear it. A whisper folded into the noise of the chair being adjusted behind him. "Sir, they are about to kill you, li ho sentiti parlare fuori dall'ascensore. Sir, they are about to kill you. I heard them talking outside the elevator." Vincent's entire body went cold in the slow, controlled way a lake freezes from the bottom up. He did not move. He did not look down. He kept his face exactly as it had been, because 6 men in this room were watching, and at least one of them, he now understood, was watching for signs of alarm. He tilted his head a fraction, as though adjusting his collar, and spoke back to her in the same low Italian, through a mouth that barely moved. "Who?" Her fingers did not release his sleeve. "The Russians, and one of your own. They have a code. The crow flies at 3. I heard them say it twice." The man from your side laughed. Every muscle in Vincent's back turned to iron. He allowed himself, for exactly 1 second, to look across the room. His eyes swept the long table as if he were counting chairs. They landed, without seeming to, on Marcus Donovan. Marcus Donovan was sweating. It was not a heavy sweat, nothing a stranger would notice, but Vincent had known Marcus for 12 years. He had watched him stand calm in gunfights, calm at funerals, calm the night they buried his own brother in a warehouse in Jersey. Marcus Donovan did not sweat in a room set to 68 degrees, unless something was about to happen that he could not control. Vincent looked back down at the little girl. He arranged his features into the soft, indulgent smile of a wealthy uncle humoring a lost child. "What's your name, sweetheart?" She met his eyes without hesitation. "Sophie. Sophie Voss." The smile on Vincent Moretti's face did not move, not 1 millimeter. A lesser man would have dropped his drink. A lesser man would have taken a step backward. Vincent had been trained, by years and by blood, to absorb a blow without letting it show on the surface of his skin. But inside, something broke loose. Voss. He had not heard that name spoken aloud in 6 years. He had ordered that name scrubbed from 3 countries of records. He had buried that name, personally, in the frozen ground of a cemetery outside Albany, on a February morning when the sky had been the color of a gun barrel. Voss. The main door of the conference room opened. 3 Russians walked in. Dmitry Volkov led the 3 of them in. He was a mountain of a man stuffed into a suit the color of wet slate, his bald head gleaming under the chandelier, his smile showing too many teeth for comfort. Behind him walked 2 enforcers with hands that looked like they had broken more bones than they had shaken. They took their seats across the long table without removing their coats, and Volkov's pale eyes swept the room once, twice, before settling on the small figure in the oversized chair beside Vincent. A single blonde eyebrow lifted. "Who is this?" Volkov asked. "Who is this?" Sophie Voss did not wait for Vincent to answer. She folded her hands neatly in her lap, the way a schoolgirl might at an examination, and replied in soft, clear Russian. "I am Mr. Moretti's translator, sir. His usual one was taken ill this morning." Volkov stared at her for a long moment. Then he threw his head back and laughed, a short, barking sound that rattled the crystal on the table. "A child. Vincent, you send a child to speak to me. Is this an insult or a joke?" Vincent smiled the smile he had practiced in the mirror since he was 19 years old. He leaned back in his chair and spread his hands. "Neither. I send what works. Shall we talk about money, or about my staffing choices?" Sophie translated every word into Russian without looking at a single face, her voice steady, her hands still folded. Volkov's laugh faded into a grudging nod. He opened a leather portfolio. The negotiation began. For 6 minutes, the Russian trafficked his terms, and the girl turned them into English with the precision of a surgeon closing a wound. She did not hesitate. She did not stumble. She rendered the tonnage, the routes, the percentages, the offshore accounts, exactly as they were spoken. Vincent answered. She reversed the current, returning his replies into Russian clean and whole. Across the table, Marcus Donovan's fingers drummed silently on his thigh. Then Volkov came to the part that mattered. He leaned forward, lowered his voice, and spoke the sentence his 2 enforcers had been waiting for, the sentence that had been agreed upon hours earlier in a language he believed no one else in the room could catch. Dostavka v 3 chasa, Prichal Red Hook. Moi liudi vestretyat vas teplo. Delivery at 3 o'clock, Red Hook Pier. My men will greet you warmly. It was the arrangement for a slaughter. Red Hook was an empty stretch of wharf after dark, and the word teplo, warm, was Bratva code for wet work. Vincent would roll up at 3 in the morning with 6 of his best men, and none of them would roll back out. Sophie turned her small face toward Vincent, her blue eyes holding his for 1/2 second longer than a translator's eyes should, and she spoke in bright, unhurried English. "Mr. Volkov proposes delivery at 5 o'clock at the main Brooklyn docks. He says his people will receive your team in a friendly manner, with handshakes, to seal the new partnership. The wrong time, the wrong place, the wrong outcome." Vincent did not blink. He did not glance at her. He understood, in the space of a single heartbeat, that this 7-year-old child had just rewritten his death certificate into a dinner invitation. He turned the full weight of his attention back to Volkov and smiled wider. "Excellent. 5 o'clock, Brooklyn. We accept. My people appreciate a warm welcome." Sophie translated the agreement back into Russian with the exact time and location Volkov had originally proposed, so that the Bratva boss would hear his own plan returned to him unaltered. Volkov nodded, satisfied, believing the trap was still set at 3, at Red Hook. Across the table, Marcus Donovan's hand shook as he reached for his glass of water. A single drop spilled onto the dark wood. He wiped it away quickly, but Vincent had already seen it. The contract was signed. Volkov's fountain pen scratched across paper that meant nothing now. Vincent rose. The 2 men shook hands, the Russian grinning like a wolf who has already tasted the sheep. "See you soon, Vincent." "See you soon. Soon," Vincent replied. The Russians walked out. The door clicked shut behind them, and Vincent Moretti slowly turned his head toward the child seated beside him, and his eyes were unreadable. Vincent did not speak for a long moment after the door closed. He looked at Sophie the way a man looks at a loaded gun he has just discovered in his own pocket. Then he raised one finger. Everybody out. The capos hesitated. Marcus Donovan began to rise, already reaching for his briefcase, his face arranged into polite concern. "Vince, we should debrief. I can stay behind and out, Marcus. Get the cars ready downstairs. I'll come when I come." Marcus's jaw tightened under his cheeks. He opened his mouth, closed it, and walked out with the rest of the suits. The door clicked shut for the second time in 10 minutes, and the silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the one before. Only 3 people remained in the conference room: Vincent, old Tommy, and the little girl in the oversized coat. Vincent pulled a chair around so that he could sit facing her, knees almost touching her ruined sneakers. He rested his forearms on his thighs, hands loose, and when he spoke, his voice was gentler than any of his men had heard in years. "Sophie, look at me. What else do you know?" She swallowed. Her small hands tightened around the stuffed bear in her lap. For the first time since she had walked into the room, the armor cracked, and Vincent saw the frightened child underneath. "Am I in trouble, sir?" "No, the opposite. I need the truth. All of it." She breathed in, shaky, and then the words came out in a whisper that filled the whole room. "I've been living in the basement." "Your basement, the one with the boiler room under the back stairs, where the vent from the kitchen blows hot air." For almost 3 months, old Tommy inhaled sharply behind her. Vincent did not react. "I don't steal, sir. Only bread from the bakery across the street, and only when Miss Rosa leaves it on the cooling rack by the window. She knows. She pretends she doesn't. I sleep on cardboard and I listen, because the vent carries voices from the private dining room upstairs. The men who eat there speak many languages. I understand most of them." Vincent's throat tightened. "How many?" "Russian, German, Italian, English, a little French. My mother taught me. She said knowing words was the only safe money a girl could carry." "What have you heard, Sophie?" "What words?" She bit her lower lip. Then she began to recite. "The crow flies at 3. The red lamp is lit. The chessboard has fallen. The harvest moves through Baltimore on Tuesday. The saint in Queens is not to be visited until the wake is clean." Old Tommy staggered back half a step and caught himself on the edge of the table. His color had drained so completely that his lips looked gray beneath his white mustache. He looked at Vincent with the expression of a man watching a floor collapse beneath his grandchild. "Vincent," he said, and his voice was hoarse. "Those phrases, those exact phrases. Only 5 men in the entire organization know those codes. You, me, Marcus, Luca, and Sal in Philadelphia." Vincent did not turn his head. "I know, Tommy." "Vincent, that means I know what it means. A traitor. High, inner circle. Someone who had sat at this table today, smiling across $80 million of poison deal." Vincent closed his eyes for 1 second, then opened them and focused on the girl again. He forced every trace of rage out of his voice before he spoke. "Sophie, do you have a home to go back to?" The child shook her head. Her eyes filled, but the tears did not fall. She had clearly learned somewhere, at some terrible hour, that tears cost more than they were worth. "No, sir. My mother died a year ago. The lady they sent me to sold me to somebody else, and I ran. I don't have anybody." Vincent reached out, slowly, and touched the small bear tucked under her arm, just to steady her, just to say you are not alone anymore. His fingers brushed the cream-colored ribbon around the bear's neck, and he saw them. 2 letters, embroidered in careful gold thread, faded from years of small hands rubbing over them. E. V. Vincent's hand withdrew from the bear as though it had been burned. He rose without speaking. He did not look at the embroidered letters again. He did not need to. 2 letters, in thread he recognized from a stitching shop in Prague he had personally sent a woman to, 6 years ago, when she had complained that her daughter's bear was coming apart at the seams. Old Tommy watched his face and asked no questions. "Tommy," Vincent said quietly, "take the back elevator. Have Luca bring the blue sedan, not the Mercedes. We're going to the house on 73rd. The safe house? Not the tower? Not the tower. Not tonight." Old Tommy understood without needing the rest. He gathered his cane, placed a warm, wrinkled hand on Sophie's shoulder, and guided her toward the service corridor. Vincent followed 4 paces behind, his eyes fixed on the small back bobbing in its enormous coat, and every step felt like wading through something deep and cold. The safe house on the Upper East Side was a narrow brownstone without a name on the buzzer. Inside, everything was quiet wood and dim gold lamplight, the kind of home that pretended it belonged to a retired professor. Vincent handed Sophie over to the housekeeper, Mrs. Ellis, with 2 soft instructions: a bath, a warm meal, the guest room on the 2nd floor. Sophie went without protest. The bear pressed hard against her cheek, her pale eyes lifting once to Vincent's face before the door closed behind her. Vincent walked down the hallway to the library and locked the door behind him. He stood in the center of the room for a full minute without moving. Then he crossed to the bookshelf, reached behind the leather-bound copies of Dante, and pulled the brass lever that released the hidden panel. The wall swung open with a soft mechanical sigh, revealing the old safe he had not touched in years. The combination came back to his fingers as if no time had passed. Inside were passports, bearer bonds, a single silenced pistol, and a manila envelope that was older than the rest. He took out the envelope and sat down in the high-backed chair by the cold fireplace, and only then did he open it. A photograph slid into his palm. A woman stood on the steps of the Met, laughing, a pair of sunglasses pushed up into her ash-blonde hair. Elena Voss, 31 years old in the picture, German-born, Russian-raised, fluent in 7 languages, and for 3 years the most trusted translator in the Moretti organization. She had read Dostoevsky in the original over espresso. She had corrected his pronunciation of his own grandmother's dialect. She had once, in a snowstorm in Boston, stayed awake for 30 straight hours translating a hostage negotiation that ended without a single bullet fired. He had loved her. In the quiet, unconfessed way a man like him was permitted to love anything. And then came the winter of 6 years ago. A whisper at a dinner in Jersey. A document leaked. An FBI contact name that only 3 people should have known. Marcus Donovan had come to him that night in the study and laid out the evidence, page by page, his voice grave, his eyes steady. She sold us. Vince. She's feeding them everything. You know what has to be done. Vincent had stared at the papers until the words stopped meaning anything. Then he had given the nod. The smallest nod. The kind a man gives when he cannot trust his own mouth. Marcus had handled it personally. Marcus had returned 2 days later, snow still on his coat, and said the words Vincent had carried in his chest like a stone ever since. It's done. She had no family. Nothing to clean up. Nothing to clean up. Vincent closed his eyes. The photograph trembled between his fingers. He rose and walked, slowly, to the door of the guest room upstairs. He did not open it. He pressed his hand flat against the wood and looked through the narrow gap at the base where the light leaked through. Sophie Voss was asleep on top of the covers, fully dressed, the bear tucked beneath her chin. In the soft lamplight, her face was Elena's face, sculpted smaller. Vincent Moretti sank to his knees on the carpet outside that door, pressed his forehead against the wood, and whispered into the silence of a house that had held too many secrets. God, forgive me. What have I done? Across the river, in a windowless room on the 11th floor of the FBI Manhattan field office, a very different kind of silence was being held. The walls were covered in photographs, 37 of them, arranged in a slow, climbing pyramid, with one name at the apex and one face staring down at everything below. Vincent Moretti. Special Agent Sarah Reeves stood before the board with a cup of lukewarm coffee in one hand and a red dry erase marker in the other. 35 years old, chestnut hair pulled into a no-nonsense ponytail, a gray pantsuit 2 seasons past its prime. She had been hunting the Moretti family for 2 years. She had sacrificed a marriage, a knee, and most of her eyesight to the files stacked behind her. Operation Iron Fist was not just her assignment. It had become the ledger by which she measured every waking hour. The secure line on her desk buzzed. She set the coffee down and crossed the room in 3 strides. The encrypted handset showed a single word on its screen. Raven. Her pulse quickened. Raven was the asset she had cultivated for 18 months. The insider who had given her everything, from Moretti warehouse schedules to 3 mid-level indictments. Raven never called unless something had shifted. She picked up. Talk to me. The voice on the other end was low and tight. The sound of a man speaking from a stairwell with one eye on the door. There's a child, Reeves. A girl, 7 years old. She walked into our Manhattan meeting today and translated Russian like she was born inside the Kremlin. She knows our internal codes, every single one of them. Sarah's marker froze over the board. What do you mean every single one? I mean the crow flies at 3. I mean the red lamp. I mean the chessboard. She recited them in front of Vincent and old Tommy. She's not just a translator, Reeves. She's been listening to us for months. She knows things I don't even know how she knows. Sarah sank into her chair. For 2 years she had searched for a crack in the Moretti wall wide enough to push a crowbar through. She had never, in her wildest strategic nightmares, imagined the crack would arrive in the shape of a 7-year-old girl, a child witness, a child interpreter, a child who had, by sheer accident of survival, absorbed the entire encrypted vocabulary of one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the eastern United States. Where is she now? Sarah asked. Vincent took her. Not to the tower. He's hiding her. If you can get to her before he locks her down, you can turn her. She'll talk. Reeves. She's a kid. She'll talk to anyone who puts a blanket around her shoulders and offers her a juice box. Where, Marcus? There was a small, ugly pause on the other end, at the use of the real name. Sarah did not care. She was done pretending she did not know who Raven was. 73rd Street, between Lex and 3rd. The brownstone with the black railing and the gaslight out front. No number on the buzzer. That's his Upper East safe house. He's there with her right now. Old Tommy. One housekeeper, maybe 2 guards out back. Sarah was already typing. Hold the line. She opened the secure channel to tactical, her fingers flying across the keys, and began drafting the operation order. Witness recovery. High value. Minor female. Age 7. Non-lethal priority. Subject Moretti to be detained if possible. Not engaged unless weapons drawn. SWAT deployment. 4A. M breach. She lifted the phone back to her ear. 4 in the morning, Marcus. Stay off the street. Don't contact me again until after. The line went dead. Sarah Reeves leaned back in her chair and, for the first time in a year, allowed herself the smallest, coldest smile. 2 years of ashes and dead ends, and tonight she was going to bring a child across the threshold who could burn the whole empire to the ground. Meanwhile, 3 miles to the north, Vincent Moretti sat on the floor beside the guest room bed. Sophie breathed softly in the lamplight. Her small hand had fallen across the bear's face, and the gold letters rose and fell with each slow breath. He did not move. He had not moved in an hour. His face, in the warm gold of the lamp, looked like the face of a man kneeling inside his own grave. Then his burner vibrated against the hardwood. He glanced down. Old Tommy. 4 words, encrypted. Eyes on the house. Vincent was on his feet before the vibration stopped. He slid the burner into his coat pocket, pushed the bedroom door open, and crossed the rug in 3 silent strides. His hand found Sophie's shoulder in the dim lamplight, firm but gentle, the way a father might shake a child awake in a house that was on fire. Sophie, open your eyes. Look at me. She blinked up at him, confused, her lashes still heavy. Uncle Vincent? Is it morning? No, sweetheart. Listen. We have to leave. Right now. Put on your coat. Keep the bear. Don't turn on any lights. Something in his voice cut straight through the haze of sleep. Sophie sat up, clutching the bear to her chest, her small bare feet dropping onto the cold floor. She pulled the oversized wool coat around her shoulders without a word, and Vincent knew then that this was a child who had practiced leaving a place in the middle of the night, more times than any 7-year-old ever should. He took her free hand. Her fingers closed around his, and the size of them, so small inside his palm, stopped his breath for a half-second. Stay close. If I stop, you stop. If I run, you run. Don't make a sound. She nodded. They were at the top of the service stairs when the first flashlight beam sliced across the library window on the ground floor. White, tight, disciplined. Then a second, then a third, fanning across the street facing curtains in a trained sweep. FBI tactical light patterns. He had studied the manuals. Vincent did not wait to confirm. He scooped Sophie up into the crook of his left arm, pressed her face against his shoulder, and took the narrow wooden steps 2 at a time down into the basement. Missus. Ellis appeared in a doorway at the bottom, with a house robe thrown over her nightdress, holding a ring of keys. She did not ask questions. She had worked for Vincent for 11 years. She simply unlocked the iron door at the back of the wine cellar and stepped aside. Tunnel runs to the service alley behind the dry cleaner on 72nd. Old Tommy's already there, Mr. Moretti. Go. Vincent kissed the top of her gray head as he passed. The tunnel was cold and smelled of damp brick. Sophie kept her arms locked around his neck. The bear pressed between them. Halfway through, they heard the first shout from above, muffled by concrete. A breach, boots on hardwood, a child's bedroom being searched a minute too late. The alley door swung open on well-oiled hinges. Manhattan at 3:47 in the morning was a different city, all wet pavement and steaming grates and yellow sodium light bleeding onto brick. The black sedan idled at the curb, headlights off, engine whispering. Old Tommy held the rear door open, his face grim beneath the brim of his fedora. Move, Vince. Move, move, move. Vincent ran. Sophie's small body rose and fell against his chest with each stride, and somewhere between the 3rd and 4th step, her arms tightened around his neck with a trust she had never given anyone since her mother. Vincent felt it through the wool of his coat, through the skin over his ribs, and it struck something inside him he did not have a name for. He dove into the back seat. Tommy slammed the door. The sedan peeled away from the curb without headlights for the first block, then eased into traffic like any ordinary late-night car carrying a tired family. 2 blocks behind them, the first SWAT van arrived at the wrong house. In the warm dark of the back seat, Sophie began to cry. Not loudly, a small, steady, exhausted cry that said she had been holding it in for hours. Her face burrowed into Vincent's lapel. "Why are they chasing me? What did I do?" Vincent looked down at the golden crown of her hair, and his own voice came out hoarse and strange to his ears. "Because you're special, kid. Too special for this world to leave alone." Old Tommy's eyes met his in the rearview mirror. Vincent gave a single, silent nod. Tommy turned the wheel east, away from every safe house Marcus Donovan knew about, toward a walk-up in Astoria that only Tommy himself had ever set foot inside. Vincent bent his head low to Sophie's ear. "Tommy, when we get there, open a full book on Marcus. Bank records, phones, meetings. I want every breath he's taken for the last 2 years." "Yes, sir." The city slid past the tinted glass. Somewhere between the Queensboro Bridge and the first gray edge of dawn, Sophie's crying slowed, then stopped. Her head grew heavy against Vincent's shoulder. Her breathing softened into the long, even rhythm of a child who had, for the first time in a year, dared to close her eyes in someone's arms. Vincent sat very still so that he would not wake her, and deep inside the chest of a man who had killed, ordered killings, and buried more people than he had ever loved, something quiet and foreign and absolutely terrifying stirred awake, the instinct to protect. Morning found them in a third-floor walk-up above a Greek bakery in Astoria, the kind of building with peeling paint on the hallway, molding, and a radiator that hissed like an old cat. Sunlight came in through gauzy yellow curtains. Sophie slept curled on the narrow couch, a plaid blanket pulled up to her chin, the bear tucked under her arm. Vincent had not slept at all. He had spent the hours between 4 and 7 watching the street through a crack in the curtain, his silenced pistol resting on the windowsill beside a cold cup of coffee Tommy had pressed into his hand. When the first ray of sun crept across Sophie's cheek, Vincent rose quietly and went into the small kitchen. He had not cooked anything for another human being in 22 years. He found eggs in the refrigerator, a stick of butter, a loaf of sliced bread past its best-by date. He stared at them for a long moment as though they were weapons whose safety he had never learned. Then he cracked 4 eggs into a pan that was already too hot, because he had forgotten to turn the burner down, and the butter hissed and blackened around the edges. He burned his knuckle on the handle. He tried to rescue the eggs with a fork. The fork scraped the nonstick surface. The bread went into the toaster. He pressed the lever and turned away to stir something that could no longer be stirred. A small voice behind him said, in accented English tinged with amusement, "Uncle Vincent, you cook very badly." He turned. Sophie stood in the kitchen doorway in an old t-shirt Tommy had found for her, the hem reaching her knees. Her hair was a bird's nest. Her eyes, for the first time since he had met her, held something other than fear. They held laughter. The corner of Vincent's mouth twitched. Then, without his permission, a short, rusty, incredulous sound escaped his chest. A laugh. An actual laugh. The kind of sound he had not made in so many years that it startled him more than it startled her. "The eggs are a disaster, kid. I admit it. My mama made scrambled eggs with milk, and a little pinch of salt after, not before. Your mama was smarter than me. Everyone was smarter than you when it comes to eggs." He smiled at her, and he scraped the charred remains onto 2 mismatched plates, and he added the stone-dry toast, and he carried them to the small kitchen table by the window. Sophie climbed into a chair. Her feet did not touch the floor. They ate in quiet, unhurried silence. Sophie forked the least burned bits onto the side of her plate and worked around them with the polite patience of a child who had known real hunger and had learned not to waste food even when it was almost inedible. After a while, she spoke without looking up. "My mama taught me Russian because her mother was from St. Petersburg. She taught me German because her father was from Dresden. She used to say, 'Language is the key to every door. Language is the key to every door.'" Vincent set his fork down slowly. "Your mama sounds like she was a remarkable woman, Sophie." She was. He waited. He was not going to push. But Sophie, still looking at her plate, gave it to him anyway. One night she did not come home. A policeman came the next morning. He said there had been an accident. He said her car went off the road near a bridge. But it wasn't true. "How do you know?" "Sweetheart." Her small hand tightened on the fork. "Because that night, before the policeman, other men came to our apartment, 2 of them, in black coats. I was supposed to be in bed. I hid in the closet behind Mama's dresses. I heard one of them say, 'It's done. Nothing left to clean up.' The other one laughed. I stayed in the closet until the sun came up. Vincent's hand closed so tightly around his fork that the metal bent. He had given that order. He had given it with a single nod in a wood-paneled study on a snowy night, and Marcus Donovan had walked out into the cold to carry it out. And for 6 years Vincent had believed Elena Voss had no child. Marcus had sworn it. Marcus had looked him in the eye and sworn it. Down in his coat pocket, Vincent's phone vibrated. He rose, crossed to the hallway, and answered in a low voice. "Talk." Old Tommy's voice was gravel and regret. Sal had a man dig. After the mother, the child went to an aunt in Yonkers. Aunt was a junkie, sold the girl for $900 to a man running a ring in Patterson. Sophie ran the night they tried to move her. Spent the next 5 months invisible. "Vince, I've seen a lot. This one hurts." Vincent closed his eyes. The wall held him up. "Keep digging on Marcus." "Already in, boss." He ended the call. When he returned to the kitchen, Sophie had pushed her empty plate to the side. She was watching him with those pale blue eyes, and the sunlight through the curtain had turned her hair the exact shade of gold that her mother's had been in a photograph locked inside a safe across the river. She spoke softly, as though she already half feared the answer. "Uncle Vincent, you're a good person, aren't you?" Vincent did not answer her question. He could not. A man who has just learned that he gave the order that made the child in front of him an orphan does not get to claim a clean answer to, "Are you a good person?" He simply reached across the small table, gently, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Sophie, who had read his silence the way she read every language, did not press him. She climbed down from the chair and carried her plate to the sink, standing on tiptoe to set it inside. His phone buzzed again. Old Tommy, voice low, electric with urgency. "Come downstairs, Vince. Now." "You need to see this with your own eyes," Vincent asked Mrs. Kovacs, the quiet Hungarian widow who owned the building and had been Tommy's secret friend for 30 years, to sit with Sophie. Then he took the back stairs 2 at a time down to the bakery storeroom Tommy had converted into a temporary nerve center. A laptop glowed on an upturned flower crate. 2 burner phones, a stack of printouts, and a cheap scanner surrounded it. Tommy sat hunched on a stool, glasses halfway down his nose, his white hair wild. "Look," 3 tabs on the screen, 3 offshore accounts, Cayman, Nevis, a shell structure out of Cyprus that Tommy had pulled apart with the help of a man who owed Vincent a favor from a long time ago. "This first one," Tommy said, tapping the screen with one gnarled finger. "Quiet deposits for 20 months. Small. Always in the same week of every month. That's bureau work. Informant payments. FBI laundering through a cutout in Baltimore. See that reference code? I cross-matched it with a Department of Justice filing from 2 years back. Same pattern. And the second? Volkov. Direct. The Bratva doesn't even try to hide it anymore. 6 transfers over 14 months. The last one was 11 days ago. $200,000. A down payment on something. The third? That's the one that turned my stomach, Vince. He's been skimming. Off our own books. Off the construction union. Off the Jersey waste haul. Off the peer rotation. Little bites, always under the radar, but they add up to almost $4 million over 2 years. Vincent stared at the screen. His face did not move. Somewhere inside him, a door that had been ajar for 6 years closed completely. Marcus. The whole architecture of the last 6 years rearranged itself in Vincent's mind in the space of a breath. Elena's leak that was never Elena's leak. The executions that had come too quickly after certain quiet meetings. The 2 capos in Philadelphia who had walked into ambushes a week after briefings only the inner 5 had attended. The FBI seizures at the Brooklyn docks that had always, somehow, missed the containers Marcus had personally scheduled. Vincent turned his face to the ceiling for a long moment. Get Sal. Get Luca. Get Polly from the Bronx. Nobody else. Nobody writes anything down. We meet at the chop shop behind Willets Point in 1 hour. Understood. 1 hour later, in the oil-smelling back office of a garage that officially rebuilt Cadillacs, 4 men sat around a rusted metal desk. Vincent laid it out in 12 sentences. Nobody argued. Nobody asked, "Are you sure?" Men like these had read the same signs Vincent had read and had, for months, been swallowing the same cold doubts. "We bait him," Vincent said. "Red Hook. Tomorrow night. The same warehouse Volkov thinks he's buying. Marcus comes along for the trade. We let him think the plan is still his plan." "Tommy, did the device I asked for go in?" "In his car. In his watch. In the back of his phone. 3 points of contact." He coughs. "We hear it." "Good." Across the East River, at the same moment, Marcus Donovan sat in a booth at the back of a half-empty Russian tea room on Brighton Beach. Dmitry Volkov sat across from him, his bandage-free wrist resting on the table, a glass of unsweetened tea cooling beside a plate of untouched pastries. The air was heavy with cigarette smoke and the low thrum of balalaika music from a speaker in the ceiling. Volkov's pale eyes were furious. 5 a.m. at the Brooklyn docks, Marcus. I stood there with 12 men in the cold. Nobody came. You promised me Moretti would walk in like a lamb. Instead, I look like a fool. It was the girl, Dimitri. She twisted the translation. I didn't see it coming. A child outplayed you. A child outplayed both of us. But I know how to fix it. Volkov leaned forward. His voice dropped to a whisper that carried the weight of a bullet already chambered. The child dies. That is non-negotiable. And for Moretti's head on a plate, I will pay you $5 million in clean American dollars, wired anywhere in the world you want it. Marcus did not hesitate. I know where they are. I will deliver them to you. Give me 36 hours. What Marcus Donovan did not know was that 3 miles north, in a rusted back office smelling of motor oil, Vincent Moretti was listening to every word of that conversation in real time through a pinhole microphone sewn into the lining of Marcus's own coat. Vincent's face was stone. Prepare everything. Back in Astoria, Sophie Voss stood on tiptoe at the kitchen window, the bear pressed to her chest. She watched a black sedan with tinted windows slow, and then stop directly across the narrow street. No one got out. The engine ran. The exhaust curled upward into the afternoon sun. Sophie slid down from the sill without a sound. She crossed the small apartment on silent feet and pulled from the pocket of her wool coat the slim pink flip phone Vincent had pressed into her hand that morning. One button, green one. Only me. She pressed it. Her small thumb trembled, but her voice, when he answered on the first ring, did not. Uncle Vincent. There is a black car downstairs. It has been there 7 minutes. The men inside are not getting out. On the other end of the line, in the oil-dim office in Willets Point, Vincent Moretti turned into a different animal. Sophie. Listen to me. Missus. Kovacs in the kitchen. Tell her, yellow sky. She will know. Go. Now. He was already moving. Tommy. Queens. Now. Tommy was out of his chair, car keys in his fist, Sal and Luca behind him with weapons already drawn from shoulder rigs. The black sedan Vincent leapt into fishtailed out of the Willets Point lot and onto the Grand Central Parkway with the engine screaming. 14 minutes. That was the distance between Vincent and the child. 14 minutes was too long. In the Astoria apartment, Mrs. Kovacs heard the words, yellow sky, and her weathered face went still as carved stone. She locked the kitchen door, pushed the oak table against it in one smooth motion, and shoved Sophie toward the narrow hallway. Run, Malenkaya. Small places. Your mama told you? Yes? Sophie had not thought of her mother's words in months, but they rose up now as clear as if Elena were standing beside her. When you are in danger, find the smallest place. The smallest place is the safest. She ran. Downstairs, glass shattered at the street-level entrance. 4 men in dark coats moved up the staircase of the old walk-up like smoke with silencers. Leather gloves, Russian-cut jackets. They did not speak. They had been given 3 words by Marcus Donovan, and a photograph of a blonde child, the girl first. In the apartment, Sophie ran down the hallway. The bear bounced against her ribs. Her small fingers found the vent cover in the ceiling of the linen closet, the one Mrs. Kovacs had cleaned out 2 hours ago while humming a Hungarian lullaby, in case. Sophie dragged the laundry stool beneath it. She climbed. She slipped the cover free with a strength she did not know she owned, crawled into the metal duct, and pulled the grate back into place behind her. She tucked the bear under her chin. The first muffled gunshot cracked through the ceiling tiles. Then a second. A window blew inward. A body hit the floor in the kitchen. And Mrs. Kovacs did not cry out because Mrs. Kovacs had fought in Budapest as a teenager and had long ago stopped giving her enemies the satisfaction. Sophie pressed her forehead against cold metal. She could not breathe. She could not think. So she did what Mama had taught her to do when fear climbed up her throat. She counted, in German, silently, slowly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Another shot. A man in the hallway cursed in Russian. Footsteps passed directly beneath her hiding place. She could smell aftershave through the slats. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Outside, 10 blocks away, the black sedan ran 3 red lights in a row. Vincent was on the floor of the back seat loading magazines with hands that did not shake. Tommy drove like a man half his age. Luca muttered the rosary under his breath. Sal checked the safety on a short-barreled shotgun. 11, 12, Drazen. At 14, the car skidded onto the street. Vincent was already out before it stopped moving. He took the bakery's front steps in 2 strides, the stairwell in 3. The door to the apartment was in splinters. What he saw inside, he would later refuse to describe to anyone, except to say that Mrs. Kovacs had died on her feet. He stepped over her and raised his weapon. The first Russian came around the corner of the living room with his gun not quite up. Vincent shot him twice in the chest before he could finish lifting it. The second fired from the bathroom doorway, and Sal ended him with the shotgun. The third tried to run out the kitchen window onto the fire escape, and Luca put 2 rounds through his shoulder from the hallway. The fourth, the last one, threw his empty pistol at Vincent and vaulted out the kitchen window before anyone could draw a bead, boots clanging down the iron steps into the alley. Silence. The smell of gunpowder. The copper and plaster air of a war zone. Vincent's ears rang. His throat felt like it had been scraped raw. "Sophie! Nothing! Sophie! Sweetheart, answer me! It's me!" Silence. He tore through the apartment. Bedroom, bathroom, closet. Bear. Where was the bear? Tommy was calling her name behind him. Luca was calling her name on the fire escape. And then, from somewhere above his head, small and muffled and trembling like a match in a storm, "Uncle Vincent?" He froze. He looked up at the vent in the linen closet ceiling. Vincent Moretti, who had not wept at his own father's funeral, who had not wept when a bullet had passed through his ribs in a Brooklyn warehouse 12 years ago, stood beneath that vent in the ruined apartment and reached up with both hands. The grate slid down. 2 small white arms reached out to him, the stuffed bear dangling from one of them. He lifted her down. He crushed her to his chest, and something warm and foreign broke loose from his eyes and ran down the stubble of his jaw for the first time in more than 20 years. They did not go to another safe house. Vincent understood, as he carried Sophie down the blood-spattered stairs with her face buried in his collar, that every address on paper was poisoned, every building Marcus had ever signed off on, every name Marcus had ever filed. The only sanctuary left was a place no one in the organization knew Vincent owned, because he had bought it 12 years ago under a dead woman's maiden name, Street Ambrose, an abandoned stone chapel on a forgotten hill in Staten Island. Its bell tower half collapsed, its stained glass windows boarded over with plywood, its wooden pews still waiting for a congregation that would never come. Tommy drove them over the Verrazzano in silence. Sal and Luca followed in a second car. Sophie did not speak the entire ride. She clutched the bear. Her eyes were red and swollen, but no fresh tears came. When the sedan rolled to a stop at the foot of the chapel steps, the late afternoon sun was dropping behind the bare November trees, turning the broken rose window the color of old wine. Vincent carried her inside. He set her down on the front pew, the one closest to the altar, and knelt on the cold stone floor in front of her so that their eyes were level. The chapel smelled of dust and wax and things that had not been loved in a long time. "Sophie, I have to tell you something, and it is going to hurt you more than anything has hurt you in your whole life. But I am not going to lie to you ever again. Do you understand?" She nodded slowly, both hands wrapped around the bear. Vincent drew a long breath and let the truth come out, piece by piece, the way a man pulls shrapnel from his own chest. He told her about Elena, about a beautiful woman who had sat 2 chairs away from him for 3 years and had translated the world for him in 7 languages. He told her that Elena had been the only person in his organization he had ever trusted without a second thought. He told her about the night 6 years ago when Marcus Donovan had come to his study with papers, photographs, transcripts, all of it laid out page by page, and had whispered the words "She's selling us" to the bureau, Vince. He told her about the single nod he had given in the warm lamplight of that study. He told her about the winter morning when Marcus had come back and said "It's done," and she had no family, nothing to clean up after. He told her that he had believed it, that he had grieved the woman the way a man like him is permitted to grieve, which is quietly and alone and never allowed, and that for 6 years, every fact Marcus had fed him about Elena Voss had been a lie designed to bury a traitor's own tracks. It had been Marcus all along. Marcus feeding information to the bureau, Marcus pocketing the Russian money, Marcus using Elena's name to cover his own treason, Marcus who had killed her, personally, on a frozen road outside Albany, and had come home and had lied to Vincent's face. Sophie did not move as he spoke. She did not breathe. When he finished, the silence inside the chapel was so complete that he could hear a pigeon walking across the boarded roof 2 stories above them, and then, slowly, the first tear slid down the little girl's cheek and landed on the bear's ribbon. "Chew, you killed my mother?" Vincent did not look away. He did not soften it. He did not reach for her hand, because he had not earned the right. I gave the order, sweetheart. I was lied to, yes, but it was still my order. My mouth, my nod. That does not wash off just because the man who moved my hand was a devil. If you want to hate me, Sophie, you are right to hate me. I deserve every bit of it. You can tell me to go out that door and never look at you again, and I will do it, because I owe you that. The silence stretched. Sophie stared at the bear in her lap. Her small shoulders shook. Once, a second tear fell. A third. She did not make a sound. Vincent stayed kneeling on the stone floor. Finally, she lifted her head, but not toward him. She looked up past the altar, up at the vaulted ceiling of the ruined chapel, where the last light of afternoon was turning the rafters gold. She looked at it for a long time, as though she were listening to someone he could not hear. Then she lowered her eyes to his. My mama always told me something. She said, you must learn the difference between a bad person and a person who has done a bad thing. She said bad people do not feel the weight. They do not kneel. They do not say, I deserve your hate. They laugh. They make it the other person's fault. Her voice was very small, but very certain. You did a bad thing, Uncle Vincent. The worst thing anyone has ever done to me. But you are kneeling on the floor. You are telling me the truth when you could tell me another lie and I would not know. That means you are a person who has done a bad thing, not a bad person. She reached out with one small hand and placed it, trembling, on his wrist. I forgive you, Vincent Moretti, 37 years old, ruler of an empire that stretched from Manhattan to Atlantic City, who had been shot twice and stabbed 3 times, and had never cried as an adult, lowered his face into the palm of that small hand. And he wept. Night fell over the chapel. Sal brought candles from the trunk of the second car, fat white emergency candles meant for power outages, and placed them along the edge of the stripped altar. Luca brought blankets. Old Tommy brought a thermos of coffee and a paper bag of rolls from a diner that asked no questions. Sophie slept on the front pew, wrapped in a wool blanket. The bear tucked under her arm, her breathing slow and whole for the first time in days. In the sacristy at the back of the chapel, Vincent Moretti spread a map of Brooklyn across a dusty wooden table. Tommy, Sal, Luca, Polly from the Bronx. 4 men, the last 4 in 5 boroughs he would stake his life on. He looked at them in the flickering candlelight, and he knew that by the end of the next night, 3 of them might be dead. I've been a boss for 9 years, he said quietly, and for 9 years I have run this family the way my father ran it, and the way his father ran it, with guns and with silence. That is what we do. That is what we are good at. He placed his finger on the map. Red Hook, the warehouse on the end of the pier. But this is not a fight we can win with guns. Not all 3 of them at once. Not the Bratva and the Bureau and the traitor sitting at my own table. If we try to shoot our way out of this, one of the 3 walks away. And whichever one walks away spends the rest of his life hunting the child sleeping on that pew. Polly lit a cigarette. Nobody spoke. So we are going to do something different. We are going to use the one weapon Marcus Donovan never thought to count. Sal raised an eyebrow. Which is language. Vincent looked up, and in the candlelight his eyes were clearer and harder than any of them had seen them in years. Tomorrow night, we send word to Volkov. We tell him the first meet was a misunderstanding, that Moretti wants to make it right, that a new arrangement is on the table, and the money has doubled. We tell him to come to the Red Hook warehouse at 11. Big money, bigger guns, bigger handshake. Volkov's ego will not let him refuse. Tommy nodded slowly. And Marcus? Marcus comes with me, as my second, as my most trusted. He thinks he is walking the boss into a slaughter. He thinks he is finally collecting his 5 million, and the whole time he believes he is in control. Luca leaned forward. And the girl? The girl stands between us. The girl translates. That is what they will see. A frightened child pressed into service, translating for the adults around her. That is what Volkov will expect. That is what Marcus will expect. Vincent's jaw tightened, but this time, she translates the truth. She gives me every word Volkov says, every word Marcus whispers, exactly as they come out of their mouths. And to Volkov and Marcus, she gives back only what I tell her to give back. She flips the direction of the knife without either of them knowing she has picked it up. He pulled a small black object from his coat pocket and set it on the map. A recording device the size of a lipstick. Every syllable they speak, every threat, every price. It streams live, encrypted, to an email that Tommy will route through 3 servers and drop directly onto the desktop of Special Agent Sarah Reeves at the Bureau. She thinks she is hunting me. By the time the tape finishes playing, she will be hunting the man she has been paying for 2 years. Sal exhaled. That is 3 birds, 1 stone. It is 3 birds, 1 child, and everything I have ever built. The men were silent for a long moment. The candles guttered. Tommy, who had known Vincent since he was a boy with scabbed knees selling newspapers in Little Italy, cleared his throat gently. Vince, you have to ask her. That kind of plan cannot be done to a child. It has to be done with her. Vincent nodded once. He rose. He walked back into the nave of the chapel and sat on the pew beside Sophie. He placed his hand lightly on the blanket over her ribs. After a moment, her pale eyes opened. He explained it to her in the softest voice he had. Slowly, plainly. He used small words. He left nothing out. He told her what would happen if it worked. He told her what would happen if it did not. Sophie listened without blinking. When he finished, she did not answer at once. She sat up, still wrapped in the blanket, and held the bear against her mouth for a long breath. Her small chest rose and fell twice. Then she looked at him, and her voice, when it came, was steadier than any grown woman's he had ever known. I am scared, Uncle Vincent. I am very, very scared. But I will do it. For my mama. So that the man who did it to her cannot do it to anybody else's mama ever again. Vincent's throat closed. He had to swallow twice before he could speak. Sophie Fuss, you are the bravest child I have ever known in my life. She leaned forward and rested her forehead against his, the way he had once, as a very small boy, rested his forehead against his grandmother's. Back in the sacristy doorway, old Tommy watched them through the candle smoke, and his old eyes were wet. Vince, he said softly, for only Vincent to hear. If any piece of this breaks tomorrow night, if one word lands wrong, they both die on that pier. Vincent did not turn his head. I know, Tommy, I know. At 2 a.m, Vincent slipped out of the chapel. He left Sal and Luca on guard at the door, and Tommy dozing in a chair by the altar with a revolver resting on his knee. He took the second sedan and drove alone, through the empty streets of Staten Island, and across the Goethals Bridge, into a narrow cobblestone lane in Jersey City that held a 3-story building with no sign above its door. This was where the Moretti Empire had been born, his father's old office, untouched in 19 years. Vincent climbed the creaking stairs to the 3rd floor and let himself in with a key he had not used since the morning of his father's funeral. He did not turn on the main light. He found the green-shaded banker's lamp on the desk and pulled its brass chain, and the room came to life in a small, tired circle of gold, leather-bound ledgers on the shelves, a framed black-and-white photograph of a young man standing on the deck of a ship named the Saturnia, Ellis Island in the background. That was his grandfather, arriving in 1951 with 4 English words in his mouth and $3 in his pocket. Another photograph of his father outside the fish market on Mulberry Street, sleeves rolled up, apron stained. A third of Vincent himself at 21, standing between those 2 men on the morning he had been formally sworn into the business. 3 generations of Morettis. 3 generations of a wall that had been built stone by careful stone, on work, on blood, on quiet cruelties, on a code that had made sense to them, because no other code had ever been offered. Vincent sat in the old leather chair and placed his hands flat on the desk. For 15 years he had woken up every morning and asked himself one question. What does the family need from me today? He had asked it in hospital rooms. He had asked it in courtrooms. He had asked it over coffins. The answer had always been the same. More. More territory, more money, more silence, more. Tonight, for the first time, he asked himself a different question. What does a 7-year-old girl need from me tomorrow? The answer came so cleanly that it frightened him. She needed him gone. Not dead, not running, just gone, the way a shadow has to leave a room before morning can enter. The empire he had built, the tower on 5th Avenue, the waterfront, the unions, the whispered calls from judges in 3 counties, all of it was a weight he could not keep around a child's neck without drowning her. If he survived tomorrow night as Vincent Moretti the boss, Sophie Voss would spend the rest of her life with a target painted on her back. If he disappeared as Vincent Moretti the man, and let the empire die with him, she might have the chance to grow up. He pulled a sheet of heavy cream paper from the drawer. He uncapped his father's old fountain pen. He began to write. He wrote for almost 2 hours. He wrote a letter to Sophie that she would not be allowed to read until her 18th birthday. He wrote about the night he had met her mother, about the proverb Elena had taught him the first week they worked together, about the photograph in the Prague safe. He wrote that he had failed her mother in the worst way a man can fail a woman. and that every good thing he would ever do from this night forward would be an attempt to chip away at a debt no letter could ever close. He wrote that he was not her father, and would never pretend to be, but that she had given him, in the span of 3 days, more of a soul than he had owned in 37 years. He signed it Vincent. Then he picked up the landline and dialed the private number of Arthur Lieberman, the quiet criminal lawyer who had handled his grandfather's will, his father's will, and the carefully laundered edges of the Moretti legitimate holdings for 19 years. Arthur, it is Vincent. I need you to wake up. I am awake, Vincent. I have been awake since your girl on 73rd did not answer the welfare call. Tell me what you need. Every legitimate asset. The real estate holding company, the restaurant group, the 2 parking structures in Queens, the trust in Geneva. All of it. Moved tonight into a single, irrevocable trust. Beneficiary, sole, Sophia Catherine Voss. Date of birth to follow. Custodian, you and my consigliere Thomas Gallo jointly. Payable for education, housing, medical, and humanitarian purposes at her discretion once she is of age. The line was quiet for a long moment. Vincent, you are liquidating yourself. I am paying a debt. Can it be done by morning? It can be done by dawn. Then do it. He hung up. He folded the letter and slid it into an envelope. He wrote on the front, "For Sophie, on the day she turns 18, and he locked it in the safe behind the photograph of his grandfather. The sky was beginning to turn gray over the Jersey rooftops when he drove back across the bridge. Old Tommy was sitting on the chapel steps in his overcoat, coffee in one hand, revolver still in the other. He rose when Vincent stepped out of the car and read his face the way he always read it, fluently. "Vince, what did you just do?" Vincent stopped at the foot of the steps. "I gave her everything, Tommy. Every legal dollar I have. The trust is already moving. Arthur is handling it." Tommy stared at him. "Boss, what are you saying to me?" Vincent looked past him, up at the broken rose window, where the first gray light of morning was beginning to find it. "I am saying, Tommy, that my life took her mother, and my life is not worth more than her future, so I am paying back what I can, while I can." He walked past his old friend, up the worn stone steps, and into the chapel. Sophie was still asleep on the front pew, the blanket pulled up to her ear, the bear in the crook of her arm. Her blonde hair fell across her cheek. Her breath barely disturbed the ribbon at the bear's neck. Vincent crossed the stone floor in silence. He lowered himself onto one knee beside her. He did not touch her hair, did not wake her. He bent forward and pressed the softest, gentlest kiss he had ever given any human being against the warm skin of her forehead. He whispered, in the faint dawn, "Whatever happens tomorrow night, sweetheart, you will be safe. I promise you." The warehouse at Red Hook was the kind of place that ghosts rented, 40 years abandoned, its corrugated roof sagging in 3 places, its concrete floor stained with decades of fish blood and motor oil. Shipping containers rusted in long rows down the center, their doors chained. A single bank of industrial lamps burned from the high rafters, throwing long, slanted shadows across everything below. 11 o'clock at night. The air off the harbor was sharp and salt-damp. Vincent Moretti stood at the center of the warehouse in a charcoal overcoat, his hands open at his sides, his breath visible in the cold. To his left, Marcus Donovan stood in a navy suit, his face arranged into the expression of loyal concern he had worn for 12 years, his pulse thudding in his throat beneath the starched collar. Between them, barely reaching Vincent's hip, stood Sophie Voss. She wore a new cream-colored wool coat Vincent had bought her that afternoon from a children's store in Bay Ridge. Her hair had been brushed and pinned back by Mrs. Lieberman, the lawyer's wife, with 2 small tortoiseshell clips. Her sneakers had been replaced with clean brown leather shoes 1 size too big. She did not clutch the bear tonight. The bear was in a duffel bag in the trunk of Tommy's car, because Vincent had told her very gently that tonight she needed her hands free. The recording lipstick was pinned inside the lining of her new coat, directly over her heart. The freight door at the far end of the warehouse rolled upward with a mechanical groan. Dmitri Volkov walked in at the head of 8 men. 8. Vincent counted them without seeming to. 4 spread left, 4 spread right, each one a professional, each coat tailored to hide what it needed to hide. Volkov himself wore a long black overcoat with a fur-trimmed collar, and his pale eyes found Sophie immediately and lit with something unclean. He smiled. "The child is worth 5 million, he said, spreading his hands as though appreciating a fine painting. "The child is worth 5 million. Sophie did not react. She had been coached for exactly that opening. She turned her small face up to Vincent and said, in bright, polite English, "Mr. Volkov says the child is worth $5 million. Every piece of blood in Marcus Donovan's body stopped moving. Vincent smiled without warmth. Translate my reply. Sweetheart, tell Mr. Volkov that business is business. Let us discuss the new terms like men. Sophie turned and repeated the sentence flawlessly in Russian. Volkov chuckled, stepped forward, and began to lay out numbers, routes, quantities. Sophie rendered each clause precisely, back and forth, her voice steady. For a full 4 minutes, nothing happened that any of the men in the room did not expect. Then Volkov tilted his head toward Marcus. His voice dropped into a murmur meant only for the Bratva ears around him, in the casual Moscow intonation of a man scheduling a dentist appointment. Как только деньги в моих руках, застрел Moretti прямо на месте. Ребенка забери живым. Это наш договор. The moment the money is in my hand, shoot Moretti where he stands. Take the child alive. That is our arrangement. Marcus nodded a fraction. Once. Just once. The way a man nods at a waiter. Vincent's heart beat exactly 1 slow time. Then he turned his head slightly toward Sophie and said, in the mild tone of a man asking for a weather report, Darling, translate for everyone, please. Loud enough that the back row hears you. Sophie took 1 small breath. Her voice, when it came, was perfectly clear. It carried to every rafter of the warehouse. It carried to every earpiece Agent Sarah Reeves was wearing in an unmarked van 2 blocks away. It carried, most of all, to the 2 men standing closest to her. Mr. Volkov has just ordered Mr. Marcus Donovan to kill Mr. Moretti immediately after receiving the money, and to take the child alive. Those are his exact words in Russian. The silence that followed had weight. Marcus Donovan went white. The color ran out of his face from the forehead down, as if a glass of water had been emptied. She's lying. The little bitch is lying. She's a child, Vince. She doesn't know what she's saying. She's making it up. Volkov blinked, confused. The English words meant nothing to him, but the body language of Marcus's panic was a language no border could conceal. Vincent did not raise his voice. Is she? Marcus? Is she making it up? Then tell me. How did she know the phrase "the crow flies" at 3-4 days ago? How did she know the red lamp? Tell me, Marcus. You and I and Tommy and 2 other men in the world are the only ones who know those codes. Tell me how a 7-year-old street child got them out of the air. Tell me, because I am very interested in your answer. Marcus's jaw worked soundlessly. Vincent took 1/2 step backward, and in the same motion his right hand slid beneath the flap of his overcoat. Marcus saw it. His hand leapt to his own belt. They drew together. Marcus was quick. Vincent was quicker, by the margin of a single heartbeat. The first round cracked the stillness like a hammer on glass. Vincent's bullet tore through the meat of Marcus's right shoulder an instant before Marcus's finger could complete its pull. Marcus's shot went wild, punching a hole through a steel crossbeam above their heads, and the ricochet sent a shower of sparks raining down across the concrete. The warehouse exploded. From behind 4 separate shipping containers, Old Tommy and 10 Moretti shooters rose at the same moment. Sal from the container on the left with his short-barrel shotgun, Luca from the right with an MP5, Polly and his cousins from the catwalk. It was the oldest maneuver in the family playbook, the one Vincent's father had named the closing mouth, and it had not been run in 9 years. Volkov's men reacted the way professionals react, which was fast, but not fast enough. 2 of the Bratva dropped where they stood before their hands cleared their holsters. A third got off a single shot at Tommy's position and was cut down by a burst from Luca. Volkov himself turned toward the nearest container, reaching for a submachine gun slung under his long coat, and Sal's shotgun caught him in the left shoulder at 40 feet. The big Russian spun and went down on one knee with a cry that was more rage than pain. Sophie screamed, "Uncle Vincent!" Vincent moved, not toward the fight, toward the child. He hit her at a run, one arm locking around her waist, and the 2 of them crashed down behind a rusted steel container marked with faded Cyrillic lettering. His body covered hers. His coat took 2 rounds in the back panel, the ceramic plate beneath it cracking on the second impact. Sophie did not cry. She buried her face in the wool of his lapel and went completely still, the way a rabbit goes still in grass. Stay down, stay down, stay down, sweetheart." Across the floor, Marcus Donovan was crawling. His shoulder was bleeding heavily, but he was still moving, his good hand dragging him behind a concrete pylon. With his teeth, he pulled his phone from his breast pocket. He jabbed at the screen with a slick red thumb. "Reeves!" He was shouting into the handset, spittle flying. "Red Hook Warehouse, Dock 7. Shots fired. Moretti is here with a child hostage. Get every unit. Now. Now." He had burned his last card. The informant had gone into the water with his own FBI handler as the oar. Vincent heard the shout and understood instantly. The timeline had just collapsed by half. He pressed his mouth to Sophie's ear. "Stay behind this container. Do not move until I come back for you." He started to rise. Marcus Donovan was faster than a wounded man should have been. He had dragged himself around the far side of the pylon, and now he emerged 3 feet from the container where Sophie lay hidden, gun raised in his good hand, his face a rictus of fury and blood. He did not see Vincent. He saw the child. "Little bitch. You did this. You did this to me, Leffe." He steadied the pistol. Sophie raised her small face. Her eyes, in the flickering shadows of the warehouse lamps, were calm in a way no 7-year-old's eyes should ever be calm. She had been calculating. She looked past Marcus's shoulder, at the rusted iron pipe that ran along the base of the far wall, the old industrial gas line that had been disconnected for 2 decades but still carried the faded yellow warning paint from its working years. Then she looked back at Marcus, and she spoke, in soft, clear German, the language she had watched him fail to understand across a dinner table 6 years ago when her mother had casually tested him. "Pass auf, hinter dir ist die Gasleitung. Sie explodiert in 2 Sekunden. Pay attention. Behind you is the gas line. It explodes in 2 seconds." Marcus Donovan was not a genius, but the word gas translates across many languages by sound alone. His head turned. Instinct, half a second of reflex pulling his eyes away from the child and toward the wall behind him. Half a second was an eternity. Vincent rose from behind the container with his pistol already up and put a round through the outside of Marcus's right thigh. Marcus screamed and crashed down onto the concrete, the gun flying from his hand and skating across the floor into the shadow of a container. The gunfire around them slowed. Volkov's last 2 standing shooters had their hands raised now, flat against the rear wall, Luca and Sal keeping them there. Volkov himself was slumped against a rusted oil drum, his face gray, his breath coming in long, furious gasps. 3 of his men were down for good. Vincent stepped across the floor and kicked Marcus's pistol further into the dark. He did not shoot him again. He looked down at the man who had been his second for 12 years, who had worn his loyalty like a suit, who had murdered a woman named Elena Voss on a frozen road outside Albany 6 years ago. Marcus writhed on the stained concrete, blood soaking both sleeves of his navy jacket. Sophie crawled out from behind the container. She did not run to Vincent. She walked, slowly, with her chin lifted, until she stood beside him. She looked down at Marcus Donovan for a long, silent moment. Then she took Vincent's free hand in her own small one, far in the distance, across the Red Hook Pier. Faint at first and then growing, came the rising wail of sirens. 1 dozen, 2 dozen, every federal unit on the waterfront converging at once. 2 minutes. That was what the scream of the sirens told Vincent's trained ear. 2 minutes before the federal tactical perimeter closed around the Red Hook warehouse, and every door became a wall. He dropped to one knee. He took Sophie by both shoulders, gently, turning her so that her small body blocked his view of Marcus Donovan bleeding on the concrete. He wanted her last memory of this place to be his face, not that one. "Sophie, look at me." She did. Her pale blue eyes had not filled with tears during the gunfire, but they filled now, because she was beginning to understand the shape of what was coming. "Listen to me very carefully, sweetheart. I am not going to run tonight. You are. You are going to go with Tommy out that back service door. There is a sedan waiting in the alley. Tommy will drive you to Rosa Martinelli's bakery in Little Italy. Rosa is expecting you. She has been expecting you since this afternoon." "No, no, no, no. Uncle Vincent, no. Yes, sweetheart, yes. This is the only way any of this ends without you getting hurt worse than you already have been." He reached into the inside pocket of his overcoat and pulled out a small, scratched USB drive on a silver chain. He pressed it into her palm and closed her fingers over it. "This is everything. Every bank account Marcus has used. Every wire transfer between him and Agent Reeves. Every text between him and Volkov. Every piece of paper inside the Moretti organization that I have ever signed. It is the whole empire, Sophie, in one little thing. You are going to give it to Agent Sarah Reeves, but only when she is alone, and only when she promises you that you will walk away free tonight, and under federal protection. Tommy will tell you when the moment is right." "But why? Uncle Vincent, why are you not coming?" Vincent's voice was steady, but something inside it was breaking very quietly, the way ice breaks beneath snow. "Because I am turning myself in, Sophie. That is the trade. They get me. They get the evidence. In exchange, they let you go, and they put a federal protective order on you, which means no one in the world can touch you ever again. Not Volkov's people, not the Bureau, nobody." The tears spilled over then. They ran down her cheeks and dripped onto the collar of her new cream coat. But you are good now. You are good now, Uncle Vincent. Please, you cannot go to prison. You cannot. You cannot. He placed one hand on each side of her face, cupping her wet cheeks in his large, rough palms. Sweetheart, listen. I have done many bad things in my life. Things your mother did not do. Things that cannot be fixed by a letter, or a trust fund, or one good night in a warehouse. I have been running from those things for 15 years. Tonight I am going to stop running and let them catch me, because a man who does not pay for what he has done has not really changed. Do you understand? No, I know. I know you don't. One day you will. And when you do, I want you to remember that choosing to pay for it was the first clean thing I ever did, and I only became capable of doing it because of you. Somewhere behind him, old Tommy had materialized at his shoulder. Tommy's weathered face was streaked with tears he did not bother to hide. The old consigliere knelt next to Sophie and opened his arms. Vincent kept his eyes on the child. You are going to have a life. A real life. You are going to Rosa, who loves you already. You are going to go to school. You are going to wear new shoes that fit. You are going to grow into a woman your mother would be proud of. And you are going to learn more languages, Sophie. Every one of them you can get your hands on. For your mama, who started you on the road, and for me, because every word you learn will be a candle you light for somebody I will not be there to light one for. He pressed the softest kiss against her forehead, the second one he had ever given her. Go, sweetheart. Run. The sirens were close now, rubber against wet asphalt. Brakes. Tommy gathered Sophie up. She struggled. She reached back over his shoulder for Vincent with both hands, her fingers opening and closing in the air as if she might still catch hold of him across the widening distance. Uncle Vincent! Uncle Vincent! Her voice broke on the second call. She went limp against Tommy's coat, not fainting, but surrendering in the way only a child surrenders, when she understands the world is going to have its way. Tommy carried her out through the service door. Vincent stood alone in the center of the warehouse. He unbuckled his shoulder holster and let it drop to the concrete with a heavy, final sound. He pulled a white handkerchief from his breast pocket. He raised both his hands slowly above his head, the handkerchief fluttering between his fingers, and he walked forward, step by deliberate step, toward the main freight door. The tactical lights hit him as the breach began. A dozen voices shouted at once. Laser sights danced across his chest. Men in black gear with FBI stenciled in yellow across their backs flooded the warehouse from three sides, rifles up, boots pounding. Vincent Moretti walked out to meet them with his chin up and his empty hands held high, and a small, unfamiliar peace settling inside him for the first time in his adult life. 6 months later, the United States Federal Courthouse at Foley Square in Manhattan was packed beyond capacity. The reporters had been lining up since 4 a.m. The marble steps outside were crowded with camera crews from every major network. People v. Moretti had been the story of the spring, and the courtroom sketches on the evening news had not done justice to the strange, slow gravity of what was unfolding inside. Vincent Moretti sat at the defense table in a simple dark suit, no tie, his wrists no longer in cuffs out of respect for the court. His hair had grown slightly longer, and a thread of silver had appeared at his left temple. He sat straight. He did not look at the gallery. The charges, read aloud over 2 full hours on the first morning of trial, did not include murder. The evidence on the USB drive Sophie had placed into Agent Sarah Reeves's own gloved hand that freezing November night had been too complete to allow for any other reading. Marcus Donovan's own voice, time-stamped and cross-referenced across 18 months of intercepted calls, had confessed on tape to the execution of Elena Voss. Marcus had described the road, the weather, the caliber of the weapon, the final words she had spoken before he pulled the trigger. Vincent had ordered a shadow, a ghost of a woman Marcus had already decided to kill for his own reasons, and the federal prosecutors, led by a stern former prosecutor named Miriam Alvarez, had concluded that the line of moral responsibility for Elena's death ran straight through Marcus Donovan and stopped there. Vincent was charged with racketeering, money laundering, extortion, tax fraud, illegal firearms possession, conspiracy to distribute, 27 counts in total. He pleaded guilty to every single one. The USB also did other work. Marcus Donovan, tried separately 4 months earlier. It was convicted on 47 counts including the murder of Elena Voss, the murder of the translator Anton Petrosian, treason against the Federal Witness Program, and the attempted murder of a minor. He received 40 years in a maximum security penitentiary in Colorado, with no possibility of parole for 32 of them. Dmitry Volkov, extradited back to Moscow, and then returned to American custody under a complex prisoner exchange. Vincent's old lawyer had quietly helped to broker, received life without parole on 3 continents worth of charges. Agent Sarah Reeves was placed on suspension the same week the recording reached the Department of Justice. Her internal review lasted 91 days. In the end, the Office of Professional Responsibility concluded that she had been systematically deceived by Marcus Donovan and had at no point knowingly protected a murderer. She was quietly reinstated, reassigned to organized crime oversight in a different district, and for the rest of her career, she would keep a photograph in her desk drawer of a 7-year-old girl in a cream coat handing her a lipstick-sized recording device at dawn. On the 5th day of Vincent's trial, the prosecution called its youngest witness. Sophia Voss, 8 years old, walked to the stand in a simple white dress Rosa Martinelli had sewn for her the night before. Her blonde hair was held back with a navy ribbon. Her shoes were small black patent leather, and they did not quite reach the floor when she climbed into the witness chair. A court-appointed advocate for minors, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Haynes, sat directly beside her. The judge, a gray-haired woman named Catherine Okonkwo, who had worked the federal bench for 19 years, adjusted her glasses and addressed Sophie with a gentleness she rarely used. "Young lady, you are going to tell us what happened. You may speak in any language you are comfortable in. We have interpreters for Russian, German, Italian, and Spanish present in this courtroom. Take your time. There is no hurry." Sophie nodded once. She began in English. She told the court about the penthouse and the translator who never arrived. She told them about the crow and the red lamp and the chessboard. Then she slipped into Russian when she described Volkov's words on the Red Hook Pier, because she said, softly, that some things should be repeated in the language they were committed in, so that the record would know exactly what they sounded like. She moved into German when she described the night her mother had not come home, and the 2 men in black coats, and the closet, and the words "it's done," nothing left to clean up. The courtroom was entirely still. By the time she reached the moment Vincent had knelt on the stone floor of the abandoned chapel and told her the truth about her mother, Judge Okonkwo had removed her glasses and was pressing a handkerchief quietly against the corner of her eye. 3 members of the jury were openly weeping. Vincent Moretti, at the defense table, sat with both hands folded on the wood in front of him and tears running unashamed down the sides of his nose. 2 weeks later, after a sentencing hearing in which Miriam Alvarez herself asked the court for leniency in recognition of the defendant's extraordinary cooperation, Judge Okonkwo handed down her sentence. 12 years in federal custody at the low-security correctional institution at Allenwood, Pennsylvania, with eligibility for early release after 8 upon good behavior and continued testimony against affiliated criminal enterprises. The gavel fell. Vincent nodded once, slowly. He turned his head and found Sophie in the 3rd row of the gallery, sitting between Rosa Martinelli and old Tommy. He raised one hand to his heart. A week after sentencing, on a damp Thursday in the visitation wing of Allenwood, Sophie Voss sat on a plastic chair and pressed her small palm against a pane of reinforced glass. Vincent's hand came up from the other side to meet hers, finger to finger, separated by half an inch of prison plexiglass. Her voice came through the old handset. "Uncle Vincent, I will wait for you, every day." Sophie's formal adoption by Rosa and Giovanni Martinelli was finalized on a bright Tuesday in April, 2 months after Vincent entered federal custody. The family court judge signed the order at 10:23 in the morning. Rosa wept into a lace handkerchief her grandmother had embroidered in Naples 60 years earlier. Giovanni, a retired carpenter with hands the size of catcher's mitts, carried Sophie out of the courthouse on his shoulders with a pride usually reserved for men who had just won championships. The child who had been invisible for a year became the most cherished small person in Little Italy. Rosa moved a brass bed into the sunlit bedroom above the bakery. Giovanni built a bookshelf that ran the length of one wall, and by the end of the first summer, Sophie had filled 3 of its 5 shelves with library books in 4 languages. Old Tommy, who had no children and no grandchildren of his own, walked down from his apartment 3 blocks away every morning at 7:30 to escort Sophie to Our Lady of Pompeii Elementary on Carmine Street, and every afternoon at 3 to walk her home. The neighborhood began calling him No Tommy within a month. He never corrected anyone. The trust Arthur Lieberman had opened on that last desperate night in a Jersey City office building grew quietly in its own Geneva account, compound interest ticking patiently forward, with Sophie's name on every page. By the time she turned 9, the principal was sufficient to send her to any university on earth. By the time she turned 12, it was enough to send 3 such children, to endow a scholarship, and to still leave her enough to live a quiet life for the rest of her days. Sophie added Italian in her 10th year, entirely so that she could speak it with Vincent during their monthly prison visits. She added French in her 11th, Japanese in her 12th, because a classmate from Osaka had mispronounced her name, and she had decided she wanted to say his correctly in return. Each month, on the first Sunday, Sophie sat at the kitchen table above the bakery and wrote Vincent a long letter. She wrote the January letters in Italian, the March letters in German, the language of her mother, the June letters in Russian, the first key her mother had ever handed her, the September letters in English, the language in which she was growing up. She wrote about her teachers, about Rosa's new recipe for almond biscotti, about Giovanni's stubborn dog, about the boy in homeroom who had tried to kiss her at the 8th grade dance and had been told politely, in 3 separate languages, to please try again in 5 years. Vincent wrote back, always, in the language the letter had arrived in. His Italian improved across the first 2 years. His German, which had been rudimentary, grew quietly fluent under her steady correction. His Russian regained the polish it had lost when Elena was killed, and reading it again did not hurt him the way he had feared it would. The handwritten pages he slid across the visitation table once a month were careful, unhurried, and always ended with the same 2 words in whatever language he had chosen that month. Always yours. In her 15th year, Sophie Martinelli Voss won the National Junior Interpretation Championship in Washington. The finals were broadcast on public television. She translated a simulated United Nations crisis briefing in 3 target languages with a precision the judging panel described afterward as a phenomenon they had not witnessed in 11 years of the competition. When her name was called for the gold medal, she walked onto the stage in a navy dress Rosa had sewn by hand, and she stood at the microphone for a long moment before she spoke. I would like to thank my mother, who is watching from heaven, my adoptive parents, Rosa and Giovanni Martinelli, who gave me a bedroom with sunlight, my grandfather Tommy, who has walked me to school every single day for 7 years. She paused. And I would like to thank my guardian, who is not here tonight, but who taught me a lesson I have carried with me into every language I have ever studied. He taught me that words are not decoration, words are not ornament. In the right mouth, at the right moment, words can save a life. The hall rose to its feet, 340 miles north, in the common room of a low-security correctional institution in central Pennsylvania. Vincent Moretti sat alone in front of a 20-year-old television set mounted above a vending machine. He watched the girl on the screen lift her medal with both hands, and 2 quiet tears tracked down the weathered lines of his face into the gray stubble of a beard he had not bothered to shave that morning. A passing inmate, a burly man from Pittsburgh who owed Vincent nothing and was afraid of him anyway, paused, saw the tears, and walked past without a word. A week later, Sophie came home from school to find a long envelope on the kitchen table. Inside was a letter from Vincent's lawyer on creamy stationery, and a federal parole notice beneath it. She read it twice, then a 3rd time, because her eyes had filled and she wanted to be certain. Good behavior. Exemplary cooperation. Release granted 3 years and 4 months ahead of the original sentence. Reporting date, 21st of next month. Next month. The gates of the Federal Correctional Institution at Allenwood, Pennsylvania, opened on a bright Thursday in April, and the air smelled of wet grass and new earth. Vincent Moretti stepped through them alone. He was 49 years old. The silver that had begun at his left temple 8 years earlier had spread to a quiet, dignified gray across both sides of his head. He wore a simple dark suit Arthur Lieberman had sent to him the week before, a white cotton shirt with no tie, and polished black shoes that felt strange after so many years of soft-soled prison issue. In his hand, he carried a single plastic bag with a Bible, a notebook of handwritten letters, and a small photograph of a girl in a white dress holding a gold medal. At the end of the long driveway, 3 people were waiting. Rosa Martinelli, her hair fully silver now, a navy cardigan over her shoulders, her hands clasped to her mouth. Old Tommy, 77 years old, leaning on the same cane he had used in the chapel so many years ago, his watery eyes already overflowing. And between them, in a pale yellow spring dress and a simple braid over one shoulder, stood a young woman Vincent almost did not recognize. 18 years old. She had her mother's cheekbones and her mother's height. The stuffed bear was not in her arms. She had left it on her bookshelf that morning, because she had decided, privately, that she did not need to carry her childhood into this doorway. She saw him. She ran. The dress flew behind her. Her braid bounced against her back. She covered the 50 yards of driveway without any of the composure she had practiced in the mirror the night before, and she crashed into Vincent Moretti the way a wave crashes into a shore that has been waiting through every storm. Her arms went around his neck. Against the collar of his suit, muffled and fierce, she said one word, "Nono." Vincent's bag slipped from his fingers and hit the pavement unnoticed. His arms went around her and folded her in, and his shoulders began to shake with a grief and a joy that had been stored for 8 full years and had no safe place to live until this minute. Sophie, sweetheart, you grew up. You grew up so tall. I waited, no, every single day, just like I said. 2 hours later, the 4 of them sat at the corner table of Rosa's bakery on Mulberry Street, the same marble-topped table beneath the photograph of Rosa's grandmother that had hosted Sophie's first warm meal in over a year. So long ago. Giovanni brought out a platter of veal Milanese, a bowl of lemon risotto, and a bottle of Chianti that had been saved since the week Vincent was sentenced. Nobody touched their food for the first 15 minutes, because Sophie was talking, and every person at the table wanted only to listen. Near the end of the meal, she set down her fork, reached into her purse, and pulled out a single folded envelope. She placed it in front of Vincent. He looked at the crimson wax seal. His breath caught. Open it. No. He slid one calloused finger beneath the flap. Inside was a letter printed on heavy cream paper. Dear Miss Voss, it is with great pleasure that the Admissions Committee of Harvard University offers you a place in the incoming class, with a concentration in international relations and a declared focus on peace negotiation and conflict resolution. Vincent read it once, twice. Then he set it down on the marble and reached across the table and took her hands in both of his. Sophie, your mother is watching. I know she is. And she is so proud. And I am proud of you too, sweetheart, more than any words in any language have ever been built to carry. In the year that followed, Sophie used a small portion of the Voss Foundation Trust to open a free language school in a renovated storefront 3 doors down from Rosa's bakery. She called it the Elena Voss Language House, and it accepted any child from any shelter in the 5 boroughs who wanted to learn. Volunteer teachers from Columbia, NYU, and Fordham donated their Saturday mornings. Vincent Moretti accepted a quiet position there as the building's daytime caretaker and safety coordinator. He unlocked the doors at 7. He fixed a leaking radiator in the Russian classroom. He walked home at 6. He drew a modest salary and, for the first time in his life, paid his taxes on every dollar. Each evening, after supper, the lights stayed on late in the apartment above the bakery. Vincent sat in a worn armchair, and Sophie sat cross-legged on the rug by his feet, and they read aloud to each other from a different book in a different language every week. Mondays were Italian, Tuesdays were French, Wednesdays were Russian, Thursdays were German, Fridays were Japanese. On Saturdays they chose something new neither of them had touched before. And so, in the simplest possible version of a life, a 7-year-old stowaway and a 37-year-old mafia boss, who had walked into the same Manhattan conference room on the same impossible afternoon, arrived together on the far side of a story neither of them had dared imagine. The lesson they left behind is older than both of them. Language is not only the key that opens doors, sometimes it is the rope that pulls a lost soul back home. Sin can be repaid, if a person is brave enough to kneel. Love does not need shared blood to become a family, and a brave little girl, 7 years old in a coat 2 sizes too large, can unmake an empire built on silence and build something gentler and stronger on its ruins. If this story touched your heart tonight, please remember to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who might need to be reminded that second chances are real. We would love to hear from you in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from? And has there ever been a language, a word, or a single sentence that changed the course of your life? From all of us behind this channel, we wish you a healthy body, a peaceful heart, and a life full of small, warm moments with the people you love. Take good care of yourselves. Goodbye for now, and we will see you again in the next story.